This is the Orlando Sentinel Editorial Board meeting with the candidates for Orlando City Council in District 5. We invited both candidates. We have not heard from the incumbent, Regina Hill, so we'll just get started with the challenger, Shaniqua Rose. Did I say your name correctly?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to take a minute, just tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe why you're running, and then we'll jump into some questions after that.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me again. I'm in the car canvassing. So it's interesting because I think several of you all have done news stories on me. I'm Shaniqua Rose. I live in the Paramount community. I'm a mom, an advocate, a mentor, and I've spent my time in this community really getting engaged. Um, I have a master's degree in public administration. I am a former City of Orlando employee. So I have, by the book, this is what the book says, what a government should run like. And then I was a product of like, how was it functioning? And I actually worked in the economic development department, which is where it's the driver of how things are going. And I realized the inequities. And I said, let me take my fight on the other side. So I started a nonprofit organization, and my focal point is mentoring youth, but I also do community outreach. During COVID, I was able to feed over 100 seniors weekly through food deliveries to their homes. I was able to vaccinate over 10,000 individuals earlier this year through a contract with the state. And I've done other programming and just really engaging with the people, getting to know the people, working together to solve the issues that we have. I'm running for District 5 City Commissioner because it's time for a change, and it's time for a change now. Orlando is a global destination. There are people from all over the world coming to this, but there are pockets of this community that feel like a back alley where it's not safe to be in, it's not safe to walk in. And it's time for us to make sure that we can change that. We can improve the quality of life. I have a 5-point plan that I want to bring out, and it's called the Hope Initiative, where we're going to bring 5 task force, and it's a 5-point plan to address the needs of the community, to bring the people together. The first one is safety. It's a huge concern in our community. Crime means different things to different people, the businesses, what residents, from one community to another, from an impoverished community to an elite community, there's crime. It has to be addressed. The drugs are out of control in this community. The second one is a business task force. There are small businesses and there are large businesses. How can we make this work together? The small businesses make up a community. That's where the villages are. So when the doors close at 5 p.m., people are going to their corner stores to pick up the basic necessities. The other thing is health. The health task force is really important. In a predominantly African American community, we struggled with COVID last year. People getting tested, people getting vaccinations. We didn't even have COVID testing sites in our community. So we had to advocate on the ground for that. And then with COVID vaccinations, we weren't getting them in the community as needed. So I went to Tallahassee, talked to legislators, and say, let's get it done. The other issue is I want to do employment. So there is a lot of development coming. There's a lot of opportunity to end and to really address the crime. And you cannot address it without jobs. So making sure as these developers are coming into town that people have jobs, knowing and understanding our youth, they can have an opportunity. I don't know if you all know, or you covered the story a couple of weeks ago, where 3 teenagers were shooting out with law enforcement. Well, why were they not in a job? Why were they not at school? Where were their parents? So we have to get to a point where we start accountability in the community, and figure out what that looks like. So employment, equitable for everyone, to ensure that everyone is getting a safe space, getting a place. Our youth, our convicted felons, our seniors, our disabled. That's part of the business. That's the employment aspect. And then the last part is beautification. We have to work together to improve the way things look. A lot of things have looked the same. If you drive down South Street, it's looked the same for the last 10 to 15 years. They have not brought out a plan to spruce up things. They have not brought out a plan to say, how do we work together? You get these seldom community cleanups, but they're not addressed everywhere. Our infrastructure is poor here. And that's part of a beautification. That's part of a beautiful city. And that you address the issues. Like, we have a very, very diverse population. I ride the bike in the neighborhood with my son all the time. There aren't safe bike lanes for us to get in. There aren't complete sidewalks throughout this community. So beautification encompasses the infrastructure. It encompasses, start rewarding people and encouraging our neighborhood associations to do best yards. We have to make sure that that's in every community. That's not in one, more of the, I would say, the upper class community. Like, all the communities have to have pride and unity in where we live.
Okay. I appreciate that rundown. We usually ask a question about the differences in policy between the two candidates. Unfortunately, your opponent isn't here. But maybe you could specify one or two places where you all differ on actual policies.
So in 2019, as a city employee, we wrote a federal grant to bring something called a homeless court. The only way that you can reduce recidivism and decriminalize homelessness, so to speak, is to make sure that individuals coming out of jail are connected to the resources. Ideally, what the homeless court does, and other cities are doing it, such as Sarasota, San Diego, ideally, when a person goes to jail, is a fine and a fee. What we wanted to do with this grant that we submitted, I was able to collectively work and bring all the organizations together, the homeless groups, the county mayor, the 33rd, the sheriff's office, the police department, to figure out how we can come together to address the issues. Out of that, thus far, you've gotten the new well, I call it the mobile crisis response team. They call it the CERT, the crisis emergency response team. But what that does is address the mental health issues. That was a plan that was part of the plan that came out of my grant that we submitted. Also, the law enforcement getting crisis intervention training, that was part of the grant that we submitted. um, as far as there's a lot of policies. We haven't had any policies created that affect and positively impact our community. I want to look at more community gardens. I want us to start looking at rent to own options. We don't have that on the west side. We don't have condos on the west side. We keep talking about affordable housing, but there's nothing to address home ownership. I am a millennial, and the millennial wealth gap, according to a study done, is 40% behind every other generation before it. We have to start saying ownership is what's important and ownership is what we need. And of
If,
course, like, that could really only be addressed by ensuring that we have equitable employment opportunities.
if you had to single out the biggest problem in Orlando, or specifically the district you would represent, what would that be?
A lot of development and a lack of employment opportunities for individuals. I mean, I personally had to cancel a fundraiser because the restaurant didn't have enough employees. Nothing is being, in my opinion, nothing is being done to tell people and encourage people, especially our young people. Like, you have to start where, before they get it negatively, before anyone, when they're prime and they're young, you have to get to them and let them know why it's important to have a job, why we have to start working to break these generational cycles after generation of living in low income. How do we break those cycles? Here's a job opportunity. They've taken trade out of schools. So by doing that, you have to look at alternatives. There are organizations on the outside that want to bring in they want to bring in what I guess you would call it, like the virtual shop, teaching individuals how to be plumbers, how to be electricians. We are now into like the tech robust of our community. We have to ensure our young people are getting exposed to that, because honestly, tech is the way we're going. They need to know about it, not just a cell phone. What does it look like to be an engineer? What does it look like to say, hey, maybe one day you can be an astronaut? It doesn't matter about your community.
I wanted to go back to Mike's question. I know we're throwing these things to you on the fly. I think the gist of what he was trying to get at was, are there differences between you and Ms. Hill? Elections are about choices, and if there is there a policy issue? Like, were you saying that Ms. Hill opposed that grant program that you were talking about, or?
She hasn't done it. She didn't do anything to initiate it. She hasn't. So here's the issue we have. There has been no initiation that has come out of her office. Everything has been developers coming in, people coming in. She had asked her to name something that came out that's still standing, that's sustainable. Giving out turkeys and backpacks is not enough for our communities. There has not been a strong engagement with the community to say, let me help you out of poverty. The drugs are out of control. Our youth are out of control. The shootings are out of control. I live near Paramore Oaks, and there's a shooting almost every week. That has to stop. There has not been a plan to address our needs in this community. And that's why I'm running. I am a resident of Paramore. I have a young son. And it's not okay when a homeless person who's having a mental health illness jumps in front of my car on 7:50 in the morning on the way to school and starts having an attack. What do I tell my child? That's okay? That's normal behavior? It's not. It just isn't. There's not a plan. We don't see a plan. There has not been a plan since Mayor Dyer's re-election plan for homelessness. There has not been a plan. And that was actually spearheaded by Andre Bailey. There hasn't been a plan.
And if I can ask one sort of follow-up, because I know police issues are something that the city has long wrestled with. What are your thoughts on the sort of status of the relationship between OPT and the residents in your district right now?
I don't believe that leadership has done a good job of saying it's okay to be a police officer. I don't believe that leadership has said, let's stand behind law enforcement when they're right, and let's stand behind the community when law enforcement is wrong. There has not been a plan. I do have a plan to address the issues with law enforcement, and it's an alliance so that individuals are typically, when a person has a bad situation with law enforcement, they feel intimidated. They usually don't feel safe. They feel scared to go report law enforcement. I want to create an alliance so that people in the community can stand behind individuals who feel like they've been targeted, whether it's racial profiling, whether they've been hurt, they've been abused, and they can go report the incidences. You have to be able to say, I'm holding people accountable. And so if the community is doing wrong, you go back to the community and say, guys, we got to do better. And let me show you the areas we do better. Let me introduce you to the officers. Let me come out. We don't have anyone coming out with law enforcement and saying, here it is. It's a photo op. That's the only time. Election time, re-election time is the only time you see any community engagement. And we saw that a few weeks ago. We planned out that. So I sat part of the Paramore Community Engagement Council who presented that. I presented that idea 2 years ago and said, let's go door to door with some of our police officers, because typical neighborhoods worked when you knew your law enforcement officer, when they knew little Johnny. They knew little Johnny lived around the corner and they had their grandmother to go to. It would scare you more to say, I'm going to tell your grandmother that you're not out here doing the right thing, as opposed to take you down to the jail. That is scary. So we had, like, that's what integration looks like, holding both sides accountable, law enforcement as well as the community. In fact, I just sat on a committee where we revised the Law Enforcement Academy curriculum, where we looked at how can we create more inclusionary processes, examples, situations, so that when law enforcement is engaging, when you come fresh out the gate, when you're fresh of a new officer, all you had was these hours where you sat and they told you what you could do. We gave ideas of how they can get more crisis intervention training, how they can engage, what does it look like you go from community to community. I was able to give them tips and tricks, get to know your neighborhood association presidents. We're not having that right now.
Great. Thank you very much.
Just a quick follow-up, and if you could be brief as possible. Do you think that the city of Orlando has done enough to hold police officers accountable when they've been in the wrong?
No. And that's the short answer. The longer answer is there's a Florida state statute that no one locally has even talked about, Florida State Statute 113, which covers law enforcement and covers, basically how investigations go. So for me, I don't believe so. And I do think, we need to have more community engagement to let them know it's not okay to be wrongfully targeted. It's not okay. And giving the community a platform to be able to feel safe reporting issues that they have with law enforcement.
I wanted to ask you about the situation downtown. There's been some coverage of the party scene at the nightclubs, and your district would take in a good chunk of that, maybe all of it. I'm wondering what you think the city ought to be doing to make downtown, that nighttime scene, a little safer for people and for law enforcement.
So in 2016, I participated in what's known as the Nighttime Economy Study, where we looked at how downtown structures and how downtown functions. What we have right now is leadership hiring consultants and not following through with the implementation plan. We proposed entertainment zones, which ideally said, this is where things go, this is where you go. It was done by RHI, Responsible Hospitality Institute. It was published, and you'll find my name as one of the participants. You designate an area, you have to say, this is what we expect here, so you know what to expect. We consider it, and it's funny because I laugh with law enforcement, we consider it control chaos, because we can say, we can put you right here. Out of that implementation plan, we created the two big things, I would say. So what we were realizing is that people were getting pushed out of the nightclub into the middle of the street with nowhere to go. So what we did was we geo-fenced where Lyft and Uber could pick up passengers. That way we were dispersing the crowds and we were dispersing them safely. We worked with some of the parking garages to ensure that they increased the lighting so that the patrons could safely go to their car and they could safely make it home. We also created the food trucks, so we gave people an option. Hey, don't just stand around on Orange Avenue. Hey, go over here down on Central, grab something to eat, sober up a little bit if you've had too much to drink, and then walk down to your Uber and get an Uber or a Lyft so that you could safely make it home.
Okay. Jay, did you want to ask a question?
I did. Ms. Rose, I just wanted to switch gears a little bit and talk about the homeless issue. Actually, you mentioned a couple of things. You mentioned a a lack of addressing home ownership and things that we need. I was wondering what you would do to address the more immediate problem of homelessness and those who are struggling right now, and especially with an eviction moratorium on the horizon. How would you deal with those problems in a more short-term manner?
We need to look at the hotels and motels that have shut their doors and are not going to open again, and we need to create transitional housing for people to live. Bless you, Scott. And we can't just sit and wait on it. We have to address the issue, and that's, like I said, hotel, motels. But the other thing is we need to be accountability, and that's one of the things I want to look at upon being elected is how hiring an accountability officer. We spend a lot of money, we give out a lot of money, but do we see results? Are we getting real results? And that's what an accountability officer would look at. How is money being spending? Are we getting real results? Can we track some of these people? Can you give an individual name and we go track those people? Because sometimes, and I'm not accusing anyone, but sometimes a person can say, hey, I visited Scott on this day, but did they really do it? So I think quality control checks is really important in the way we're spending money currently with homelessness. Like I said, I do think aggressively looking at hotels, motels, going and using those that have been abandoned to be a place. And then I do think rolling out the actual homeless court, which one of the agencies that I work closely with is there's a potential for them to be rolling out a small portion of the homeless court. So it's interesting because the community has criminalized homelessness like across this nation, and the only way you can do it is to decriminalize it and really ensure people are connected to the social services that they need that cause their homelessness, whether it's a drug addiction, alcoholism, mental health, or they just had a bad point in their life. There are a lot of people living paycheck to paycheck. There are people choosing rent over medication, and that one slight they need to change a tire means homelessness for them. So ensuring that one, we address those individuals by creating housing spaces that are immediate and then looking at alternative, which is how are social services being rendered in the community.
I wanted to ask you a question about the way the city council operates. There's been some sentiment over the years that the mayor has a little bit too much sway over the city council. Do you see it that way? And can you think of a specific area where, or maybe specific vote where you would have differed with what the majority voted on?
Yes, it is a mayor-led city, which is not the way the charter was structured. The $9.5 million, to me, I call it a political stunt. To purchase land with no plan was unacceptable and a waste of taxpaying dollars when we have individuals that are homeless on our streets, when we have people dying every day. That's not okay. They purchased that land in Paramore with no plan. So that's that. I mean, I could say that that's the most recent. The second one I could think of, and I'm just going to give you another one. So we look at the other side because I'm looking at the west side, but at the east side, they created that noise ordinance without having a meeting, having a conversation, or even saying, hey, bar owners and clubs, let's come together and figure this out. That's unacceptable because downtown is the core of the city of Orlando. So when you take away that with no plan, okay, if the clubs and the bars go away, then what? What do? We have a bunch of empty buildings, which we could potentially be going into that with COVID. Businesses saying it's better for us to be virtual. So I think that, to me, that was a big one on the east side that I can say I didn't agree with. If you have to sit down and have conversations with people and stop just telling them what you want to do.
Okay. Well, the time flew by. It always does when we when we do these things. We sure do appreciate you taking the time to talk to us, and want to wish you and your opponent the best of luck.